Samuel Taylor Coleridge consumed up to 2 quarts of laudanum a week. His daily existence was defined by severe addiction, physical illness, and the humiliation of medical enemas. His early life was marked by erratic behavior. He deserted his studies at Cambridge to enlist in the 15th Light Dragoons under the alias Silas Tomkin Comberbatch, a military career that ended months later with an official discharge on the grounds of insanity. Despite this biographical wreckage, Coleridge approached the problem of human creativity with a structural logic that few of his contemporaries could match. His legacy is built on a central contradiction. He is a poet world-renowned for permanently unfinished fragments like Kubla Khan, yet his critical writings set out an integrated, finished architecture of literary theory. To understand this poet, we must map the chronology of his life as anchor points for his specific, highly technical philosophical lexicon. This involves mastering 4 specific concepts: the dichotomy of fancy versus imagination, the biological theory of organic form, and his epistemological shift regarding the life of the natural world. By examining the structural vocabulary he designed to explain human genius, we can see why his own greatest narrative masterpieces remained as fragments. At Jesus College, Cambridge, in the early 1790s, Coleridge was introduced to radical political and theological ideas that challenged the conservative status quo. He channeled this utopian idealism into a plan with poet Robert Southey to found a commune in Pennsylvania called Pantisocracy, where all members would govern equally. The plan was eventually abandoned. In 1795, a meeting with William Wordsworth sparked a relocation to Somerset. This environment triggered his most productive creative years, producing the first part of Christabel and the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. In 1798, the 2 poets published Lyrical Ballads, a volume that marks the definitive beginning of the English Romantic Age. The project relied on a strict division of labor between the 2 writers. This matrix shows how they divided their thematic responsibilities. Wordsworth focused on the ordinary. His goal was to take subjects from everyday life and give them the charm of novelty by applying the modifying colors of imagination. Coleridge took the inverse. He chose supernatural or romantic subjects, aiming to ground them with enough human interest and psychological truth to make them feel real. To achieve this, Coleridge coined his first major critical term, the willing suspension of disbelief. This is a transaction between author and reader. The poet provides internal consistency and psychological realism. In exchange, the reader provides a degree of poetic faith, setting aside their rational skepticism for the duration of the work. This division of labor established his lifelong critical obsession, the reconciliation of extreme opposites, such as the natural and the supernatural, or the self and the world of nature. In 1817, Coleridge published Biographia Literaria, a genre-defying masterwork that synthesized his literary theory and philosophical opinions. His primary goal was to dismantle 18th-century empiricism, specifically David Hartley's law of association. This theory suggested the mind was a tabula rasa, a blank slate that merely recorded sensory impressions. Coleridge argued that this reduced human thought to a passive, mechanical sorting system. He accused Hartley of confusing the mechanical conditions of knowledge with the active principles of the mind. In its place, he constructed a tiered cognitive model. At the base is what he termed fancy. He defined fancy as a passive, mechanical faculty of memory. It has no power to create new things. It merely reassembles fixities and definites that come to it ready-made from sensory experience. Above fancy sits the primary imagination. This is the universal power of perception. Coleridge framed it as a repetition in the finite mind of the eternal act of creation. It is the vital power that allows us to perceive a unified world rather than a chaotic stream of data. At the apex of human cognition is the secondary imagination. This is the conscious, willful power of the artist. It dissolves and dissipates our existing experiences in order to recreate them. It is a unifying, esemplastic force that fuses disparate ideas into new, complex wholes. The output of this secondary imagination is not a mechanical assembly, but a biological growth. This is the core of his theory of organic form. He argued that a poem's structure should grow naturally from its internal content, as a plant grows from a seed, rather than being forced into a pre-existing mechanical mold. Biographia Literaria was his explicit rejection of the machine age, providing a blueprint for creativity rooted in the organic soul. By 1802, the biographical reality began to pull away from his theoretical ambitions. He faced a failing marriage, an intensifying dependency on laudanum, and a growing estrangement from Wordsworth. These personal crises forced an epistemological shift. His early poetry treated nature as a living, divine whole that could communicate with humans. By the time he wrote Dejection and Ode, that belief had vanished. He now argued that nature has no life of its own. It is merely a dead mirror reflecting our internal state. If we have no joy in our hearts, we perceive only a cold, lifeless reality. This loss of internal joy coincided with the paralysis of his secondary imagination, the very shaping power he used to construct his poems. His unfinished poem Christabel reflects this failure. It depicts a central character falling into a state of isolation and spiritual void, unable to rise or hope. Critics note that Christabel suffers from a defect in its structure. Coleridge could not conceive of the work as a whole, resulting in a narrative that stops because he lacked the metaphysical clarity to finish it. The protagonist's life-in-death isolation reflects Coleridge's own psychological trap, as addiction and despair eroded his creative agency. As Coleridge's focus shifted from the spontaneous flow of the secondary imagination to the analytical dissection of its parts, the creative act became a subject of study rather than a tool of production. The very rigor he used to define genius became the weight that froze his masterpieces as paralyzed fragments. Viewed as a single timeline, we can see how Coleridge's critical lexicon was built directly out of his personal and intellectual struggles. He described his struggle as that of a sink-spotted spider navigating upstream. Its 5 legs represented his attempt to resolve the conflict between logic and philosophy, a quest for a unified way of thinking. The philosophical rigor that complicated his ability to finish poetry is precisely what established him as a founder of modern literary criticism. He defined the poem as an organic entity rather than a mechanical assembly of meter and rhyme, elevating the role of the creative mind. Coleridge died in 1834, leaving behind a legacy as both a damaged archangel and a genius. He was buried in this stark vault in the Highgate crypt. While his narrative poems remain unfinished, his critical vocabulary provided the foundation for analyzing literature and human cognition in the modern era.